So continuing with our game, we're going to look at how we can spawn power-ups next. And it's going to be very similar to how we spawn obstacles with a few nuances. So why don't we go ahead and see how our power-ups will work. So I'm going to press play. You immediately see we have a plus green sign. The way our power-up spawner is different is it does not spawn in waves, and it spawns in random intervals. So you can see I have one there. Let's see how long it takes. Almost immediately we have a new power-up. So basically we have a minimum time it'll take to spawn and a maximum time it will take to spawn a new power-up. And then it will pick a time between those two ranges, and that way we can get randomly spawning power-ups. And again, our screen shrink will make sure that our power-ups spawn within our playing field without doubt. All right, so why don't we just get into how we can start making that. All right, the first thing we have to do is lay the groundwork for a separate obstacle spawner and a separate power-up spawner. So why don't we go ahead and repurpose the spawn controller to work with any of with all the obstacles we're going to be using. Okay, so what I'm first going to do is go to my scripts folder, and I'm going to take the spawn controller and I'm going to give it a new name. I'm going to call this obstacle spawn controller. I'm going to copy and paste that name. So now when I open it, I have to now update the name of my class at the top of my script here. There we go. And I have some notes here that I'll just get rid of for right now. We'll cover that in an upcoming chapter. All right. So after we've updated the class name and our script's name, we need to edit some variables real quickly. We have spawn count per wave. That's kind of not very descriptive, so why don't we call this obstacle spawn count per wave? So we're not confusing our power spawn count and our obstacle spawn count. So that means we have to come down here to our for loop, and it's not too easy to see. I'm going to double click that to copy and then double click my old spawn count per wave variable name in my for loop and just give that a little bit of an update. All right, great. So that's really all we have to do for our obstacle spawn controller. Just give it a new name and maybe update a single variable. But we're coming across a new problem. In our mover script, we can already see that we're calling the wrong class here, but we need to be able to separate what direction and what obstacle, what speed we're going to be getting from which controller. So in a second, we're going to have a player spawn controller, a power-up spawn controller. So this logic right here has to know which spawn controller to get the direction and speed from independently. So what we're going to do is, before we fix these wrong variable names, we're going to do something like, let's make a conditional check. All right. So we're going to say if, let's see. Well, how are we going to know if it's an obstacle that is being spawned in a spawn controller, and how are we going to know if it's a power-up being spawned out of a spawn controller, a power-up controller? Because this mover script is going to be attached to both our power-ups and our obstacles. So that's why we have to make the distinction, and we have to be able to say which object is which. And to do that, we're going to use tags. So I'm going to go to my prefabs folder, highlight my obstacle, and I'm going to go to tags in the top right-hand corner, and I'm going to add a tag. I'm going to go ahead and add obstacle as a tag. I have to reselect my obstacle, and now I should have an obstacle tag ready to go. So now all of my obstacles will have a tag that we can access in our code here. Let me just zoom in a little bit. All right, great. So we're going to say if GameObject.tag equals obstacle, and you have to get this spelling exactly right. Then we're just going to encapsulate all of this code right here inside the body of this new if statement. And next, we actually have to come in and update our spawn controller name. Remember, we renamed our script to obstacle spawn controller, so we just have to do a little bit of updating there. And I think that's all we really have to do for that as well. All right. In a second, we'll make another if statement right below that'll check if the game object we're spawning is a power up. So I'm going to hit Control S. All my errors go away, and let's see what's going on. Nothing's happening. All right. Since I renamed the script, I might have to go ahead and remove my obstacle spawn controller and then reattach it and set it all back up. So I'll reattach my obstacle spawn controller to Game Manager. I'll go to Prefabs and I'll set my obstacle. This is what I'm going to spawn. And then my obstacle speed. Let's set that to 5. And how many are we going to spawn per wave? Let's do 5. And then half a second between each spawn within a wave. And then 3 seconds between our waves. So something is going wrong here. I think I know what it might be. We might have some spelling errors going on with our tags. Okay, so I want to go in and open up obstacle. I want to copy that tag. I want to get the exact spelling on that tag. Now I'm going to go to my code, and I don't think I'm looking for the right tag. So I'm going to try to get that spelling exactly right. Obstacle. And that looks pretty good. And that's what it was. So the reason why that wasn't working is whenever we were instantiating our spawned object here, our spawned object with the tag of obstacle, and then we go to our mover script, we were looking to see if the object that was spawned had the same tag, and if there's a spelling error in that tag, it won't recognize it, and it won't update our direction or our speed. So with the right tag called, we're good to go on that front. All right. So that's how we've used our spawn controller and repurposed it to actually be a specific obstacle spawn controller. So why don't we move on to Powerups next? And to do that, we're going to go ahead and make a new Powerup prefab. So we're going to make this real simple. Instead of making one from scratch, I'm going to go into my project folder and duplicate obstacle and call this Powerup. Well, maybe I should call it Powerup for real. And then I'm going to drag this Powerup into my game scene so I can tweak it so it looks more like a Powerup. So I'm going to delete these missile fins. I'm going to duplicate this mesh and parent it. And I'm going to make a little plus sign like you saw in the preview. I have a material I need to make, so I'm going to give it a new color. So I'm going to go to, where's materials? There we go. Call this Powerup Matte. Change its color to maybe a bright green. Apply. Apply. Change the name from Obstacle Mesh to Powerup Mesh. All right. And I'm now going to give my Powerup a new tag in my inspector. So we're going to go to Add Tag, and we're going to say Powerup. All right, great. So, so when you make a tag, you have to actually go back to the menu and select Powerup right there. All right, great. Powerup. So now I'm going to save my scene and save my project. And all I have to do now is just apply this prefab. Well, I could drag it back down in my prefabs folder to update it. Or I could just go to my inspector and see where it says prefab in the top right-hand corner. I'll just hit apply. So I'll delete that Powerup, and just to make sure, yes, I now have a new Powerup using the same mover script that my obstacles are using. All right, great. So now I need to go in and I need to go into my mover script now. So I'll go to my scripts, double click mover. And of course, bring up mono develop. So I need to come in here now and do the same kind of logic right here. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. Come one down. Oh, don't need that bracket there. Let me undo that, or that slash. And I'm going to make this an else if. And we're going to call this Powerup. All right, so we need to make a few changes within this line of code. I don't need to be looking at the the obstacle spawn controller. I'm going to go ahead and change these lines of code to call a Powerup spawn controller that we haven't created yet. All right, so you're going to see a lot of broken syntax here. And I'm going to go down here to my move dir spawn.dir, and I'm going to call this Powerup dir and Powerup speed. Hit Control S, and I think that's really all we have to do here. We're getting errors because we actually haven't made our Powerup spawn controller, but we've laid the groundwork for it. So now our mover script will be able to say, okay, is this an obstacle or is this a power-up? And if so, I'm going to get those specific directions and speeds to move my game object here. So that's why we had to make these two different lines of code. We need to be able to separate the difference between an obstacle and a power-up because they both will have unique directions, speeds, and all that good stuff. So I'll hit Control S. So why don't we go on and learn how we can create a power-up spawner by using our obstacle spawn controller. Or what did I say? Yeah, we're going to learn how to make a power-up spawn controller by basically duplicating our obstacle spawn controller and editing a few lines of code. So to get started on that, let's see. Well, first, why don't we figure out what we want our power-up spawner to do? All right. First of all, we don't want to fire off our power-ups in waves. We just want to spawn a single one or maybe a few of them at a time. We'll get into that. We just want to fire them off one at a time, and then we need wait a random time before more power-ups spawn. And we need to actually get in there and create some new unique variable names and some new unique logics that's going on. So why don't we just jump into that? So, like I said, I'm going to select my obstacle spawn controller. I just renamed and edited a little bit. And I'm going to duplicate it. And we're going to rename it, get rid of that one at the end, and rename this Powerup spawn controller. Oh, Unity is just loving what's going on right now. So many errors. But we know what we're doing, right? Or at least we're pretending like we do. So after I change the script name, I always have to come in and update the public class name. So we'll call that Powerup spawn controller. And we need to do quite a bit of editing here to get it exactly what we want it to do. All right. So we're going to edit some variables now. We're going to leave this variable the same because it's our spawned object. That should be pretty self-explanatory. And we have to update these new strings and floats because in our mover, we're trying to access Powerup dir and Powerup speed. We're not trying to access obstacle dir on our Powerup controller script. So why don't we go ahead and rename those? So we're going to say Powerup dir for direction, Powerup speed for speed. All right. And since we're not spawning obstacles and waves, why don't we give this a new name? Let's just call this Powerup spawn count. Let's see. Yeah, Powerup spawn count. This will allow us to say, okay, maybe as we get farther along in the game to give the player a fighting chance, we'll spawn 2 power-ups at different directions at the same time. Or we can just keep it 1 the whole game, or we can turn it to 0 so we're not getting any more power-ups. Okay, so that'll allow us to have a little bit more flexibility on what kind of stuff we want to spawn. And since we're not doing waves anymore, and we need a random time to spawn these guys, we're going to get rid of our wait timers. And in this time, and in their place, we're going to do a minimum spawn time and a max spawn time. This will allow us to set a range for how fast we want our power-ups to spawn while giving us a little bit of randomness so they're not just spawning on the dot every 10 seconds, for instance. Maybe after a power-up spawns, maybe it'll be 5 seconds or 7 seconds before the next power-up spawns. This is what's going to give us that nice random range and allow us to really tweak the balance within our game for how fast and how frequently we want to spawn our randomly generating power-ups. So that's good. So we got rid of our max wave weight. We got rid of our spawn weight. What we need to do now is we need to add an extra random variable. So why don't we just do it in our line that's handling all of our random positions and random sides. Let's say random time. All right. And these variables are private. They might have been public in our last one, but since these values are only figured in our logic within the script and no other classes will need to get at them, no other scripts will need to get at them, we're just going to make them private so it's not clogging up our inspector. But you know what? Actually, I'm going to make them float again so we can see all the working parts as we go in our inspector. I'm going to have a chapter later on devoted just to cleaning up our variables and controlling the scope of our game. So defining the balance and the gameplay will be even more streamlined without having to look at this unnecessary stuff that might get in the way when we're trying to figure out how to balance the game or change values over the course of the game to make it more challenging. All right, so that'll be a future chapter. But what I want to really take away is that we're adding a random time here. All right, and I'm making it public so we can see it updating as we play our game. So now we need to go down to our for loop. You can already see we have a syntax error here. And why don't we call this Powerup spawn count? And that'll fix that for loop. So we have all this logic here that was controlling our obstacles. So we don't really have to change too much here, though. We do have to go in and update these variables here. So let's just go ahead and get rid of all the glaring syntax errors that are occurring after changing up some variable names. So I'm going to copy and paste new Powerup dir into all of these if loops right here, or if statements, if loops. I don't even want to know what that means. All right, so let's keep going. So we've gotten rid of all of our weird. Well, we have these two guys to think about. We'll get to those in a second. We don't have spawn weight or wave weight anymore. But let's tackle that after we get settled up here. So what we need to do is our while loop will always be true. Yes, that's true. So what our for loop is going to do now is instead of do waves, we're going to go ahead and just totally get rid of our spawn weight. All right, so I'm just going to delete that line. That'll get rid of the time between obstacles being spawned in a wave. So now our Powerup spawn count will instantly spawn all three or all two or just a single Powerup at the same time. So you're going to have four. If you want to have 4 Powerups spawning, they'll automatically just show up. If you wanted to do waves of Powerups, you could keep that line of code here and then make sure you're leaving it back in your variables up here. So you could keep the same kind of wave logic, but since it's Powerups, I'm not going to have that functionality. I don't want waves of Powerups to spawn. I just want randomly occurring ones. Okay? So that's what we've done. We're going to go ahead and delete the wait time, the wait for seconds in our for loop. So now we no longer have waves. We just have, a barrage of Powerups spawning all at once. And mainly we'll probably keep our Powerup spawn count set to 1, so only 1 spawns at a time. So okay, so as we're going through our for loop, we only have maybe 1 Powerup to do. So we're going through, we're finding its max position and min position along a wall as usual. We're finding out its side position or how far out the current wall is that we'll need to spawn from. And here's where we're getting our random ranges going. So we're going to add another random bit of code here. We're going to say random time equals random.range. And this time we're going to say min spawn time as our minimum float value and max spawn time. This will give us that random range between our 2 time variables right here that will spawn our next Powerup randomly in the future. So it gives us a little bit more control over how frequently we get that. All right, so I think we're good so far. What we want to do now is after we've deleted our first yield return wait for new seconds, we're left with this guy right here. So instead of wait time, we're going to say random time. We're going to randomly wait for amount of seconds that we figured up here. That we figured out up here, and that'll give us the code we need. And I think that's all the changes we need. So why don't we go ahead and make my player visible again? And now we have to attach my script to my game manager. Right now I only see an obstacle spawn controller. So let's attach Powerup spawn controller to my game manager. Let's attach my Powerup prefab to my spawned object, empty game object. This is what we're going to be spawning. And we'll leave direction empty because our random direction will figure that out for us. Power-up speed, let's make it a little bit faster than our normal obstacles, so they're a little bit harder to hit. Power-up speed count, let's just spawn one at a time. And I want them to spawn between 5 to 10 seconds. So, you might have one power-up spawn, and then the next one will spawn in 6 seconds, or the next one will spawn in 9 seconds, or the next one will spawn in 10 seconds. It'll all be random there. So why don't we hit play and see what happens? All right. So an initial power-up will spawn due to the way we have our power-ups coded right now. So when's our next one going to spawn? All right, there we go. So we need to keep our eye maybe on this variable over here in our inspector. Hopefully this value will change. Right now it's spawning a power-up every 9 seconds. And there we go. The next power-up will spawn in 7 seconds, or 7.287725 seconds. Next power-up will spawn in 6 seconds. And it's still picking the random side to spawn from. It's still picking, the right direction and the right rotation to spawn from. We're just randomly getting them now. And of course, since we're building off our old code, it's going to always follow the dimensions of our playing field. So that's basically how we can repurpose, an old line of code, an old script, whatever you want to call it, a class, a script. We're repurposing it, editing some variables, and making it work just a little bit differently for us. So now we have obstacles being spawned and power-ups being spawned.